The steak was the meal Arthur Hayes had had in a week. He wanted to enjoy every bite. The long ride to redemption had been dusty. The sun had been hot on his shoulders. His own cooking, beans and salt pork over a campfire, kept him going, but it wasn't comforting. This steak, sizzling on a plate in the Silver Dollar Saloon, was comforting. It was a reward for fixing 100 feet of fence, for pulling a calf from a creek, for surviving another season alone. The saloon was loud with clinking glasses, rough laughter, and a piano playing off-key. Men crowded the bar, their faces red from drinking and celebrating their wages. Arthur sat in a table in the corner, his back to the wall, a habit he learned over years of preferring his own company. He cut a piece of meat, chewed it slowly, and let the noise wash over him. This was why he came to town. You put up with the noise to get things you couldn't make or grow yourself. A steak, some flour, a moment of feeling connected to a world that mostly spun on without him. He was halfway through his meal when a woman and a little girl stood over his table. They were Chinese. Their faces showed a deep tiredness. Both wore worn-out dresses. The woman was thin, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked at the floor. The child, a girl of 7 years, looked at him directly. Her eyes were dark and big, with a gravity that didn't belong on a face young. Woman spoke in a voice, "Sir, forgive me. May we have your leftovers?" Arthur looked at her bowed head and the girl's stare. He saw the woman's hands shaking. He saw the way the girl's small shoulders were squared, as if holding up a weight too heavy for her. Then he looked at his plate. The steak, which had been a comfort, now felt like much. What was left of it, with some potatoes, seemed like a feast. The saloon didn't quiet down. The space around his table felt empty. He knew some people were watching. The woman and the little girl were hungry. They needed food. He could say no. He could say yes. He looked at the girl's eyes again. They were not just hungry, they were old. They held no plea, a fact. This was their life. This was their reality. In that moment, those eyes broke something in him. He cleared his throat. "No," he said. The woman flinched. She started to pull her daughter, but Arthur wasn't finished. He raised a hand to stop them. "You can't have my leftovers," he said. He motioned to the chair opposite him. "You will sit and have a plate of your own, both of you." He called a waitress, Molly, ordered 2 more plates of steak and 2 glasses of milk. Molly disappeared. The woman looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were filled with surprise and gratitude and sorrow. The woman and the little girl sat down. They didn't speak. The little girl kept her hands folded in her lap. Arthur went back to his meal. It didn't taste good anymore. The food was just fuel now. A man named Sterling, who owned a freight company, spoke up. "You've got to spot Hayes." Arthur looked up. Sterling was smiling. It wasn't a kind smile. "They were hungry, Sterling," Arthur said. "This town's got hungry mouths without importing more." Sterling said, "Work is for those who earn it. Charity makes people weak." He looked at the woman and child with contempt. The woman froze. Her daughter stopped chewing. Arthur felt angry. "A child isn't weak for being hungry," Arthur said. "A man is weak for watching it happen." Sterling smiled again. "Be careful, rancher. The kind of company you keep says a lot about a man." Woman Lynn did something. She looked at her daughter, whispered something. Then she stood up. She looked directly at Sterling. She held his gaze for a moment. Her expression was one of dignity. She said nothing. She just held his gaze until he looked away. Then she bowed her head to Arthur. "Thank you for the meal," she said. She took her daughter's hand. Left, leaving behind a half-eaten plate of food and a silence that was heavier than any noise. Arthur sat back down, feeling angry and respectful at the time. He gave them charity. The woman paid with her pride. As he watched them leave, he saw an object on the floor where they stood. He bent down, picked it up. It was a smooth river stone, polished by many turns in a worried hand, with a single unfamiliar character painted on it in faded black ink. He closed his fist around it, the stone still warm. He knew down that this was not over. The freight boss warning echoed in his mind. Some debts are more than money. He felt he was about to find out what that meant. A storm hit that night, a summer storm that turned Redemption's dusty streets into muddy rivers. The wind howled around Arthur's ranch house, rattling the windows. He sat at his kitchen table, the smooth river stone in front of him, the painted character a silent question. He couldn't shake the image of Lynn and Anne walking into the dusk. Where did people like that go when a storm hit? The town had a church. The preacher was a strict man who often spoke of sin and rarely of mercy. The hotel cost money. He knew they had none. His horse, Solomon, whinnied from the barn, sounding distressed. Cursing himself but unable to sit, Arthur pulled on his raincoat and headed out into the storm. The rain was a driving sheet, and the wind threatened to blow the lantern out of his hand. He fought his way to the barn, the wooden door creaking as he opened it. The familiar smell of hay and animal warmth met him. Solomon was restless, his ears twitching. It wasn't the storm. Arthur moved down the aisle, the lantern light casting long shadows. Then he saw them. In the driest stall, huddled together on a pile of old straw, were Lynn and Anne. The little girl was asleep, her head in her mother's lap, her small body curled against the cold. Lynn was awake, her back against the stall. She looked up as his lantern light fell on her, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched her daughter closer, ready to defend her. Arthur stopped, holding the high so she could see his face. He didn't want to scare them. "The storm," he said, his voice sounding weak against the wind. "I thought you needed a place." The fear in her eyes subsided, replaced by sorrow. She nodded slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement. He saw that their thin dresses were damp, stuck to their skin. They must have been caught in the wave of the storm. Without another word, he went back to the tack room. He returned with 2 wool blankets. He didn't enter the stall, laid them over the partition. "It's not much," he said, "but it's dry and warm." He expected her to take them to thank him quietly. She spoke, her voice low but clear. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Hayes?" The question was direct. She wasn't asking out of gratitude. She was asking for a reason. In her world, kindness from a stranger likely had a price. Arthur thought for a moment. "I have a mother and sisters east," he said. "I'd hope someone would help them if they were in trouble." It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was in the memory of a girl's eyes and a mother's strength. He pulled up a milking stool. Sat a respectful distance away, setting the lantern on the ground between them. A golden light pushed back the darkness, creating an island of calm. "My name is Arthur." "I am Lynn," she said softly. "This is my daughter Anne." For a time they sat in silence. The only sounds were the rain on the roof and the child's steady breathing. It was a quiet. Arthur realized it was the time in years he had shared a silence that didn't feel empty. "Mr. Sterling," Lynn said finally, her voice a whisper. "You should not have spoken to him for us. A man like that needs to be spoken to from time to time," Arthur replied. "He said something about a debt." Lynn's hands tightened around her daughter's dress. She stared into the flickering flame as if seeing a story. "My husband, Way, worked for him," she began. "He drove a freight wagon on the route. It is dangerous. Bandits weather. Way was a driver, very careful." She explained that Way had worked for Sterling for 3 years. The pay was poor. Sterling had promised them something more, a deed to a parcel of land just outside of town, a place to build a home, to plant a garden, a place to stop wandering. The agreement was that a portion of Way's wages would be held back each month to pay for the land and supplies. Way was very careful with numbers, Lynn continued, a hint of pride in her voice. "He kept his ledger. He showed me every entry." Spring, Way made the final payment for the land. The land was theirs. Mr. Sterling was supposed to file the deed with the office. The deed never came. Instead, 2 years ago, word arrived that Way's wagon had gone over a ravine in a flash flood. Way was gone. When Lynn went to see Mr. Sterling holding Way's ledger, the man had produced his set of books. His ledger showed that Way was still deeply in debt for supplies for a wagon wheel for lost cargo. Mr. Sterling claimed the debt was now more than the land was worth. He told Lynn the land was forfeit. He told her to leave. "His numbers are lies," Lynn said, her voice shaking with rage. "Way was not a debtor. He was a man. He earned our home." Reached into a cloth bundle beside her and pulled out a thin, worn book. She handed it to Arthur. He opened it carefully. One side of each page was filled with columns of Chinese characters. The other side had dates and numbers written in English in a precise hand. It was a record of every dollar earned, every penny spent. It was a story of Way's labor and Lynn's family's hope. "He knew," Arthur murmured, looking at the entries. "He knew not to trust Mr. Sterling's books." Way was careful, Lynn repeated, as if the word itself was a shield. "He is gone, and I am just a woman, a Chinese woman. The marshal in town, he listened to Mr. Sterling, not to me." He looked at Way's book, said he could not read the scribbles. Injustice of it settled like a stone in Arthur's stomach. Mr. Sterling hadn't just cheated Way, he had stolen Lynn's family's future, banking on the fact that no one would listen to an immigrant widow. The morning the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Arthur had let Lynn and Anne sleep in the barn, brought them breakfast from his kitchen. As they were eating, a rider approached. It was Mr. Sterling. He sat atop a black horse, looking down at Arthur's modest ranch as if it were a bug he was considering squashing. He didn't dismount. "Hayes," he called out, his voice smooth and pleasant. "I was just riding by, want to make sure you weathered the storm right." "We are fine," Arthur said, stepping away from the barn, positioning himself between Mr. Sterling and the doorway where Lynn and Anne were hidden from view. "Good," Mr. Sterling said, his eyes scanning the property. "A man with a spread like this needs transport for his cattle. My freight lines offer the rates to get your stock to the railhead. It would be a shame if there were complications, delays." The threat was no longer veiled. It was as plain as the pistol on Mr. Sterling's hip. "Stay out of my business. I will ruin you." Arthur looked at the man on the horse, the man with the suit and the dirty soul. He thought of the ledger in his coat pocket, of a child sleeping in his hay, of Lynn's dignity in the face of public humiliation. He had lived his life by a code. Mind your affairs, harm no one, and expect the same in return. Mr. Sterling had broken that code. He had brought his ugliness to Arthur's doorstep. Arthur's choice was simple. He could retreat into the safety of his solitude, turn his back and survive. He could stand his ground for 2 strangers who had nothing and risk everything he'd worked for. It was hardly a choice all. He walked slowly toward Mr. Sterling's horse, stopping when he was close enough that the man had to look down at him. "I think you should get off my land, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "I'd suggest you find a good lawyer. The new territorial marshal is due in town week. I hear he can read numbers fine in any language." Mr. Sterling's polite mask finally dropped, his face darkened with fury. For a second Arthur thought the man might draw his gun. Mr. Sterling was a coward at heart, a man who fought with ink and paper, not with steel. He jerked the reins, wheeling his horse around violently that it kicked up a spray of mud. "You'll regret this, Hayes," he spat, his voice a venomous hiss. Your charity case, you'll both end up with nothing." He spurred his horse. Galloped away, leaving Arthur standing alone in the quiet morning air. Arthur watched him go, feeling not fear, a strange sense of peace. He had spent years building fences to keep the world out. He had just torn one down. 6 months later, the first snows of winter were dusting the peaks. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. From the porch of his ranch house, Arthur watched a ribbon of smoke rise from the chimney of a new small cabin that stood on the neighboring parcel of land. It was a little house, built of freshly cut timber with a tight roof and glass in the windows. He had helped build it himself. The new territorial marshal had been a man of integrity. Presented with Way's ledger and Arthur's testimony, he had launched an investigation into Mr. Sterling's business practices. It turned out Lynn was not the person the freight boss had cheated. Other ranchers and merchants came forward with their stories of forged invoices and crooked deals. Faced with prison, Mr. Sterling had sold his company for pennies on the dollar, disappeared, leaving town on the same rail line he had controlled for so long. The deed to Lynn's land, properly signed and stamped, was in a box inside her new home. The door to the cabin. Anne came running out, bundled in a wool coat Arthur had bought for her. She was chasing a flurry of snowflakes, her laughter bright and clear in the winter air. She was no longer the haunted child from the saloon. She was a little girl, happy and safe. Lynn followed her out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She saw Arthur on his porch, raised a hand in greeting. He waved back. In the months they had been neighbors, a quiet friendship had grown between them, built on shared work and mutual respect. Lynn was running a laundry service for some of the more decent townsfolk, and with a small garden and a few chickens, she was making her own way. She was a woman of strength. That evening they shared a meal at Arthur's kitchen table. It had become a tradition. A thick beef stew simmered on the stove, filling the house with a warm, savory steam. Anne was at the table, not watching the food with eyes, but carefully drawing a picture of a horse on a piece of slate. Lynn ladled stew into 3 bowls. She set one in front of Arthur, her movements calm and graceful. Their hands brushed for a moment, an accidental contact that sent a surprising warmth through him. "It is stew," he said, taking a bite. "You taught me," she replied with a smile. They ate in a silence, the only sounds the clinking of spoons against ceramic and the howling of the wind outside. It was a kind of silence than the one he had cultivated for so many years. His old silence had been about absence, about keeping the world at bay. This silence was about presence. It was full of understanding and shared peace. He looked at Lynn and Anne across the table from him. He had stumbled into their lives by ordering a steak in a saloon. He had offered them a meal, and in return they had given him back a part of himself he hadn't even realized was missing. He had thought a lone man was a man, a self-sufficient man, but he had been wrong. A lone man was just lonely. He learned that a good neighbor, a friend, was stronger still. Anne held up her slate to show him her drawing. It was a picture of 3 figures standing in front of 2 houses holding hands. He smiled, an easy smile that reached his eyes. The winter outside was deep. In his small house it was warm.